Welcome to part 4 of this Stylized Desert Scene Blender tutorial series. If you haven't seen the previous parts, definitely check out the tutorial playlist with the link in the description. So in this part, we're going to be modeling the plants, we're also going to be adding the ground and the mountain in the background, and doing the materials. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files, you can get that on my Gumroad and my Patreon with the links in the description. And then before we start, I wanted to let you know about my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And every time I create another 10 procedural materials, I update the material pack so my customers can get the new updates with the new materials. So once you set up and install my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you can just drag and drop the materials into your 3D scenes. If you'd like to learn more about the product, you can check out the product trailer video with the link in the description, and I'll have the product pages linked in the description. So let's model the plant object. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to start by adding a plane, and let's just bring the plane over here so it's kind of out of the way so we have a bit more space. And then I want to scale this way down to a 0.05 so it's very small, so hit enter. Let's zoom into the plane, and I'll press Ctrl A and I'll just apply the scale. So we're going to start by modeling one of those leaves, and then we'll duplicate the leaves and spin them around to make the circular plant. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale it on the y-axis so it's a bit smaller, and then I can extrude it up, and we'll scale it up on the x-axis. Let's also go to front view, and I can extrude it up again. We'll scale it a bit bigger, and then extrude it up again, and extrude it again, and this time we'll start to make it smaller, and we'll have it get really small. And then this part right here, I want to scale it on the x-axis. I'll type 0 and enter, and then if I select everything, I'll hit the M key to merge, and I'm going to merge by distance so that these vertices here are merged together. All right, and then also if I go to wireframe, I think I'll box select this part here and make it a little bit thicker, and this part here make it a bit thicker. And also I might select everything and bring it down on the Z-axis a bit, and I'll move everything down a little bit. And then this bottom face right here, we don't actually need it, so I'll go to the face select, and I will select this bottom face, and we're just going to delete the faces. Let's go back to object mode, and I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. So I'll now go back into edit mode, and I'll go to side view, and I want to select everything, and I want to rotate the entire thing over, and I want to bring it down so the origin point is right there, so the plant goes down there and then ends at the origin point. So just stick it right about there, and then I'll go to wireframe, and I'm going to go here to the vertex select. I'm just going to deselect everything, and I'll just click and drag to box select the plant and kind of rotate it and move it up. Deselect everything, click and drag and box select the top part of the plant. We're just going to rotate it up again, and just do the same thing and just kind of rotate the entire thing up like that and rotate it up like that. So if I go back to solid view, you can see it just kind of slants up. And then also in edit mode on side view, I'm going to duplicate the entire thing and rotate it. And then this leaf is going to rotate up a bit sharper. So I'll go into wireframe. I'm just going to box select this part, rotate it up like this. Just select this part and rotate it up like that. So it rotates up quite a bit faster, so it's a bit more sharp. All right, that is pretty good. We'll select this entire thing by pressing the L key with your mouse hovered over that piece. And let's hit 7 on the numpad for top view. And we're gonna rotate this around, just kind of give it a random rotation and bring it down a bit. All right, so I'm now gonna select all of the mesh, and on top view, I will duplicate it. So hit Shift D, then you can hit R to rotate. I'm going to rotate it around, and we'll stick it there into the center. Select everything and duplicate it again and rotate it, and we'll rotate that around. Maybe scale everything down a bit on the Z-axis and bring it down. So we're just kind of randomly rotating them and scaling them. We'll select one of these, this one here, and I want to rotate it over a bit because it's overlapping the other one. And we can maybe just make this one a bit smaller. And then we'll duplicate it and rotate it over. Put another one there, duplicate it again. We're just going to continue to do this until we have a pretty thick plant. And we can also have some here in the center, maybe some smaller ones here in the center. Put that one right there, duplicate it and rotate it around, duplicate it again, rotate it around. And we'll have maybe 4 of them there in the center. And if there's any more spots like right here, that's a bit weird how it's overlapping. You could maybe rotate it and maybe bring that up a little bit. And maybe these bits out here, these are kind of coming out a lot. So maybe rotate them in just a little bit. All right, so just something like that, just a basic plant there. So I now want to have one more plant, but this one is going to be a bit bigger and a bit taller. So in object mode, I'll duplicate this plant and move it over here. Let's zoom into this one, and I'll go into edit mode, and this one I will give a random rotation in edit mode, and I'll also scale the entire thing up on the z-axis so it's a bit taller, and scale the whole thing up a bit, and move it up so the origin point is still there on the bottom, kind of in the center there. All right, that's good. And then you can just kind of move it around just to make it look a bit more unique and different. So I will just select some of these here by pressing the L key, duplicate them, maybe have a few more, scale them in a bit, put another one right over here. And if you just want to select some of these, so just press the L key with your mouse hovered over some of these and give them a random rotation. And because this plant is going to be a bit bigger, I think I want to duplicate a few more of them and just make this plant even thicker and just give it even more of those leaves. Now the scale is actually quite a bit too big. You can see I kind of modeled these a little bit too big if you compare them to kind of like the rocks. So let's go to front view. I'm going to scale these both down, maybe just scale them to like half the size or something like that. So they're a bit smaller, and move them over, and I'll press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. That's a little bit better size. You can kind of compare the size to kind of those plants. So I do want these to be kind of smaller plants. So that's a pretty good size. So let's select both of the plants, and I'll hit the M key to move them. Let's click on new collection, and I can just call this plants. Click on OK. So now we have a plants collection, and I can move the plants collection right here. So let's now create the plant material. So I'll go over here to the shading workspace, and I'll zoom into the plant. And hold down the Z button, we'll go into the rendered viewport mode so we can see the shading. And let's click on new here to add a new material. I can rename this material to plant. And then this object here, we want to choose the same plant material. All right, so let's create a cool procedural material for this desert plant. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture, and let's Control Shift and select the Voronoi to preview it, and then I'll press Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes, and I want to use the object coordinate, so I'll put the object into the vector so it places the texture on the object more evenly. And let's change a few of the Voronoi settings. So I'll turn the scale like a 25, so we have all these little dots here. I'll also turn the detail up to the max of 15, and then this roughness I'll turn up to like a 0.55, so just a bit more roughness. And this lacunarity value, I'm going to turn this up to a 4, and the lacunarity value is basically going to add all these tiny little dots, so that's going to look pretty interesting. So I want to change the colors, so I'll go to the add menu, and we can add a color ramp to change the contrast and the colors at the same time. So I'll add a color ramp, and then for the colors, I want this to be kind of like a yellowish brownish color because these are desert plants, so they're going to be kind of like a grayish or brownish lighter color. And if you want to use the same colors I'm using for this side here, this is going to be a hex value of 735C2A. And then this one right over here on this side, this is kind of like a lighter brown. So this is going to be a hex value of 8E774A. And then to make it a bit more contrasty and to be able to see the darker brown, I'm going to drag this one right over here. So just drag the tab over there so you can kind of see those little dots there. All right, so we can take the color, and we can put that into the base color, and we can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now, when I duplicate each plant, I want them to be a slightly random different color. So to do this, we're going to search for the object info node. And this object info node is different from the object info node in the geometry nodes because this is using the materials. Now, this object info has a random value, and the random value here is randomly going to generate colors from white to black per object. So what I can do is I can now add a mix color node, and we'll put the mix color node right here after the color ramp, and this random can go into the factor. So now every time we duplicate the object, it's randomly going to be a bit lighter or a bit darker. So for the actual colors, we want to use the base color that we created, so the color can go into color B, and then this other color can go into color A. Now right now it's using the same exact colors, but I want to make some of them lighter and some of them darker. So we're going to go to the add menu, and we can search for the hue saturation value, and we'll put this between the color ramp and the mix color. And then I'll take this hue saturation value and I'll duplicate it, and let's stick it right up here. So we have two of them. And so now I can make some of them lighter and some of them darker. So the value is going to make it lighter or darker. So this top one, I'll turn the value down to like a 0.6. And then this bottom one here, I'll turn the value up to like a 1.3. So you don't have to follow me with this part, but if I just duplicate this and move it up here, now if I just continue to duplicate this, you can see each one has a randomly different color. And if I Control Shift and select the mix to preview it, you can kind of see what's happening. So some of them are lighter and other ones are darker. So I'll just select these plants. I don't need them, so I'll just delete that. So I will Control Shift and select the principled shader. And then I do want to turn the roughness up a bit, so I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.8. light. And you may have noticed I accidentally deleted the sunlight when I deleted those other plant objects, so I just pressed Ctrl Z and brought back the sunlight. So let's now go back here to the layout, and I'm going to be adding the ground plane. So I'll press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and I'll go to the add menu, and let's go to mesh, and I'll add a plane. And I'm going to scale this plane up really big, so I'll scale it up and I'll type 80 and enter, so it's quite big. And I'll press Ctrl A and apply the scale. So let's go into edit mode, and you can press Ctrl E with the mesh selected, and we're going to choose subdivide. And here on the subdivide settings, if you click right behind me, on the number of cuts here, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 100, so it's very subdivided. And then after I do that, I'll press Ctrl E again, and I'm going to subdivide it one more time, so it's really subdivided. And we're doing this because I want to add detail to make the desert ground kind of bumpy. Now I'm also going to hold down the Alt key and select this back loop here, and then I'll press the O key to turn on proportional editing. And I'm going to bring this out, so hit G to grab, bring it out on the Y-axis, and I can scroll my mouse wheel to make the proportional editing bigger, and I'm just going to bring this way out so it's kind of longer and stretched, and then kind of stretch out this part here and stretch out this part here, just so it's kind of a bit longer as it goes back. All right, that's good. Let's go back to object mode, and I also want to add a camera, so I'll go to the add menu, I will add a camera, and then let's just move to where we want the camera to be in the scene. So I'll zoom in here, just bring it right about there, kind of on the very front of the plane, and I'll press Control Alt numpad 0, and this will bring the camera to our position. And then if you click in the corner here to select the camera, you can hit G to grab and move the camera. Just stick it here in the center. You can also hit G and then tap the Z key twice to bring the camera in and out. And I'll just bring it right about there, and I want to bring it pretty close to the plane. So I'll now select the ground again, and I'll go into edit mode, and I want to make it kind of bumpy. So I'll just select some points here and hit G to grab, and you can scroll your mouse wheel to make the proportional editing bigger. And I'm just going to make a few random bumps here to kind of make it random. So I'll bring some parts up a bit, maybe bring some other parts down a little bit, just make it look a bit more natural and random. Let's also go back to object mode, and I'm going to select the camera and also select the plane, and I'm going to bring them both forward a bit so they're kind of in the center of the scene. So the camera is going to be closer to the center, and then the plane will go out farther. Now also you can see that these objects here are kind of in the way, and we don't really want to see them right now. So right here on the large cacti and the small cacti and all these collections, I'll click on the check mark here just to hide them, to get them out of the way for now. Now the plane disappeared, and that's because it was added to one of these collections. And you can see right here, if I open up the large rocks, it was added to this collection. So you can unhide the collections, and then you want to select the camera and the light and the ground plane. Let's hit M to move them, and we're going to put them in this default collection. And if you want to, you can double click on this to rename this and just call this like scene or whatever you want to call it. So now I can hide those collections, so we just have the camera, plane, and sun in that main collection. All right, let's go back into edit mode here on the plane, and we're just going to make it kind of bumpy and random. Bring these up here, bring these down. So that's pretty good, something like that. I don't want it to be too bumpy, but something like that is fine. And then in object mode, let's also shade this object smooth. Now later on when we add the geometry nodes, the scene will be a bit laggy, and so I actually want to delete all of the extra mesh here which the camera can't see. So I'll bring the camera a little bit further back, and then I want to select the plane and go into edit mode, and I'll hold down the Z button and go into wireframe. I'll deselect everything, and then I can just click and drag, and I'm going to just box select all of these parts here that the camera can't see, and I'll hit X and delete the vertices and just make sure that none of these are going into the camera's view. You can also select a vertex here and kind of pull it out if you want to just give it a bit more space, and then do the same thing here. So box select all of these parts here just like that. Hit X, we'll delete the vertices. You can select a vertex here and kind of pull it out a little bit using the proportional editing to bring it forward. So now if I go back to solid view, all of this spot here and all this here, we don't need the geometry nodes to be distributed on that area. And so we can make the scene lower poly and it won't be quite as dense. So the scene won't be as laggy. So you can press the L key with your mouse hovered over these pieces, and we'll just hit X and delete the vertices. And then if you go into the camera view, there's still quite a lot of detail back here that the camera won't see. So you can just box select some of these areas, delete the vertices, and box select that there and delete the vertices. And it's actually better to do it in the wireframe view. So do it in wireframe so it selects all the back vertices. we'll just delete those vertices and just select that there and delete those vertices. So if I go back to solid view, you can see that we've just kind of cut out what the camera can't see. And of course, if you're making like a large animation, you want the camera to move around the scene, you wouldn't really want to do this, but I'm just doing a still render. So this way the scene will be less dense. So let's now create a sand material for the ground. So I'll go here to the shading. You can go into the rendered view. Let's click on new here to add a new material to the ground, and you can just call this sand or desert sand or ground, whatever you want to call it. So for the sand, I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for two nodes. We're going to add a wave texture, and we're also going to search for a noise texture. So the noise texture will just give it kind of some sandy noise and bump all over the surface, and then the wave texture will give it some cool waves along the sand. So we'll select the noise texture and we'll press Ctrl T to use the texture coordinate in mapping, and let's use the object coordinate. So I'll put the object into the vector, and the mapping vector can go into the vector of the wave texture. And let's Control Shift and select the wave texture to preview it, and I can change a few of the settings. So I want to change the scale to like a 0.5 so it is smaller. So a 0.5. Let's also turn the distortion to like a 20 so it looks a bit more random. And then this detail here, I will turn to just like a 10. You could turn it all the way up to the max of 15, but I find in Blender Eevee, turning the detail just a little bit farther down can make the scene a little bit less laggy. Sometimes procedural materials are a bit laggy in Eevee because it's trying to render it in real time. And then this detail roughness, I could turn this to like a 0.55. Let's also Control Shift and select the noise texture, and I can change some of the settings here. So the detail and the scale, I'll turn these both to like a 10, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. So I'm going to use the wave texture, and we're going to put that into the normal to give it a little bit of bump, and the noise texture will go into the base color. So let's put the noise texture factor into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it, but I want to change the colors. So I'll go to the add menu, and we'll just search for a mix color. We'll put the mix color between the noise texture and the principled, and make sure the factor is going into the factor of the mix. So we can now make two different colors for A and B just to make a few sandy colors. So both of these colors are kind of going to be like a light brown or kind of an orangey color. And if you want to use the same exact colors I'm using, then color A is going to be a hex value of C1754C, and color B is going to be a hex value of A77248. So it is a bit subtle, but there's a little bit of variation in the color now and a little bit of noise. So let's Control Shift and select the principled shader. And then I also want to put this wave texture into the normal to give it some bump, but then we need to convert the color data into normal data. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node between the wave and the normal. But then this color here needs to be going into the height value of the bump to convert it to bump data. And we'll just wait for Eevee to load this up. So now you can see it looks really noisy, and it definitely looks like sand, and there's kind of those waves there, but it's way too strong. So I'll turn the strength way down to like a 0.04, so it is much more subtle. And then I also want to mix in the noise texture into the bump. So I'll select the bump node and I'll duplicate it, and I'm going to stick it right here after this bump. So now this factor can go into the height value of this bump. And for the strength value, I'll turn that up to a little bit to like a 0.05. So 0.05. And then also you can select the sunlight, and I want to rotate the sunlight up a little bit so it's just a little bit more contrasty, and there's going to be some longer shadows. And on the roughness here, let's also turn this roughness to a 0.8 so it is a bit more rough. So now we have a cool desert sand material. So I now want to add in the animal skull, and I'll be downloading that 3D model from BlendSwap. I mentioned that at the beginning of the tutorial series, so I'll have a link in the description to the free animal skull model if you'd like to download it from BlendSwap, or you can model your own one if you want to. So once you download the file from BlendSwap, you'll just need to extract the zip file, and then to add it in to this scene, we'll click on File, and we're going to click on Append. And then just go into the folder where you have the model, and I'm just going to click on the blend file, go inside it, so double click on it. We're going to go to the object, so let's choose object, and then I'll just select everything and we can click on append. So let's go back to solid view, and we've appended everything, so let's just move everything up here so I can see everything. And it comes with a few things we don't need, so we don't need the camera, so we'll delete that. We don't need these two light planes here, so we can delete that. And then let's click and drag to box select the model and press the period on the numpad to zoom into it. So it is pretty small in the scene. And for this object, I actually don't really want the bottom jaw because I want it to be kind of sitting in the sand. So I'm going to delete the bottom jaw. And then here are the teeth. I don't really need the bottom teeth, so I'll delete that. Now we can select both of these objects here, and I actually want to join them together. So if I first open up this side panel here and go to the modifiers, you can see it has some modifiers. So I don't actually need the subsurf, so I'll click on the X here to delete the subsurf, and click on the other one here, and we're going to delete the subdivision surface modifier. And then on the mirror modifier here, you can just click on the drop down and apply that, and we'll select the teeth here, and on the modifiers, click on the drop down and apply that. And then if you select both objects, you can press Ctrl J, and that will join them together into one object. And then if you want to make the object just a little bit more low poly, you could click on Add Modifier, and you could search for the Decimate modifier. And on the Decimate, you can just turn this ratio down. So I might turn it down to like a 0.7. And then we will click on the drop down and apply the Decimate. So if I go into edit mode, you can see it's gotten rid of some of the vertices. So it's a bit more low poly. Let's scale the skull up here so I can see it better. And we're going to bring it down here and just stick it kind of in the front of the scene, kind of like that. We'll go into the camera view, and I want to bring it up a bit and scale it up a bit. We can also rotate it on the Z-axis. Let's go back to the layout here so we can see this in the full screen. And I'm going to bring it over here and kind of stick it down into the sand. Let's zoom into it and just kind of place it how you want in the sand, so the teeth can kind of be digging into the sand a little bit. So just something like that is pretty good, and I kind of want to put it in the rule of thirds, so the compositing looks kind of nice. So we'll kind of have the desert scene, and then kind of right over here on the side, not exactly in the middle, but just kind of sitting over to the side, there's that little animal skull. And once you've scaled it to the size that you like, you can press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. So I'll hold down the Z button and let's move our mouse up into the rendered view. And I want to set the depth of field so that it's focusing on the skull. So if you select the camera and go here to the camera data properties, you can open up the depth of field here and turn this on. And then on the focus object, you can click on the eyedropper and choose the skull. And then if you drag the f-stop value, that's going to change how strong the depth of field is. And I'm going to change my f-stop value to a 1.8. I think 1.8 is good. So way in the background, it's a bit blurred, but then the stuff closer up to the camera will be pretty focused. Now let's also add a simple material to the skull. So I'll select the skull. Let's go to the shading workspace and I'll go into the rendered view. And let's add a new material. So I'll click on new and I can just rename this to skull. And I want to add kind of an ambient occlusion so that the inner parts of the skull are a bit darker. So I'll go to the add menu and let's search for the ambient occlusion, and we'll put this right over here, and the color can go into the base color. But then to make the ambient occlusion stronger, I'm going to go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp in between the two nodes here. And if I drag the black tab over, that's going to make it stronger so you can kind of see it better. So I'll drag it kind of to about here. So kind of the crevices and creases now are a bit darker. You can especially see it right in there. Those are a bit darker. And then on this white tab right here, this color, I want to make it just a little bit darker so the animal skull base color is a bit darker. So I'll just make it kind of like a light gray. And then I actually want to make it a bit shiny. So I'll turn this roughness to like a 0.35 so it's a little bit more shiny. And that'll be it for the material. So I can go back here to the layout. So let's now create the background mountains, and to add the mountains, I'll be using Blender's built-in landscape add-on. So let's click here on edit, we'll go to the preferences, and here on the add-ons tab, we're gonna start to type in land, and then you can see here's the add mesh ANT landscape add-on. So it's built into Blender, so you can just check mark it, you can save the preferences and then close Blender's user preferences. So now go to the add menu, and under mesh, you can go all the way down and you can choose landscape. So this is a super cool built-in Blender add-on. Let's go back to solid view, and then before you click away or move the landscape around, you can click right behind me on the landscape settings. And there's a bunch of different settings you can play around with. However, I'm just going to go up here to the presets, and I'm going to choose the canyon preset. So this canyon preset is really cool, and so it'll create these really cool desert mountains. And then of course, if you want to, you can play around with like the random seed. If you don't like how it looks, you can change that. You can also change like the noise size. You can change distortion settings. There's a lot of different settings you can play around with, but I'm just going to leave the default settings how they are, and then I can close those landscape settings. So I want to rotate this on the Z-axis, and I'll rotate it by 90 degrees. And I actually want to rotate it on the Z-axis by -90 so that this part here, this cool canyon part, is on the back. So now let's scale this up really big, and we're going to bring it far back into the scene. And let's make it really quite big. We're going to make it even bigger than the main landscape object, so make it quite big, and then we're going to move it really far back because I want it to actually look like the scene has a lot of depth, and in the background the mountains are going to be a bit blurred. We can also go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the entire thing up a bit on the x-axis so it's a bit longer. Let's hit 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and I can also go into edit mode and scale everything up on the z-axis so it's a bit taller, and then back in object mode just kind of move this over here to the side, and then let's zoom into the object, and I'll go back to edit mode, and I want to rotate the front part down so you can see more of the canyons. So let's hold down the Alt key and select this loop here on the front, and we have the proportional editing still turned on, so I'll bring it down on the z-axis. You can scroll your mouse wheel to change the proportional editing size and bring that down like that. So in the camera view now, you can see a lot more of those mountains. And you can just select a few points here and just move some of the mountain up and just kind of play around with the shape. So I might go back here, select some of these points here on the back and kind of just pull them up just so you can see the mountains a little bit better and really just get it to the shape that you want. You can also like select this point here and kind of rotate it and bring it down and just kind of bring that down there so you can't see the end of it. And we're going to be adding another mountain on this other side. All right, so just play around with the shape and then go into edit mode. We can select the entire mountain. And in edit mode, we're going to duplicate it. Let's also turn off the proportional editing. And then I'll scale it on the x-axis by -1 so that it's flipped. And then I can kind of rotate it sideways and bring it back a little bit. So something like that. Go back into the camera view. So we now have another mountain, but by rotating it and inverting it, it looks a little bit different. And then turn back on the proportional editing. And then you can kind of scale it. Let's move this mountain up here and just bring that entire thing up a little bit. Maybe go to the back here and pull a bit of these up. Now, if you go back to object mode, you can see that the normals need to be flipped of this one because we inverted it. So if you go into edit mode, deselect everything, hit the L key to select that one, and then Shift N to recalculate the normals. Let's go into the camera view again, see how that is looking. So you can maybe move the entire thing up a little bit and just play around with the shape of the mountains until you get something that you like. All right, let's go into the rendered view to kind of see how that's looking and make sure you shade the object smooth in object mode. So I want to add a bit more detail to the mountains because you can see the mountains look quite low poly. So let's just select the mountains. We'll go here to the modifiers and we're going to click on add modifier and we're going to add the subdivision surface modifier, and I'll turn the levels viewport and render both up to 2. Now these mountains are a little bit high poly, so to make them lower poly, let's go into wireframe and I'm just going to press the A key to make sure everything's deselected, and then you can hit the B for the box select, and you can box select any of the vertices which you can't see. So like down here, hit B for the box select all those vertices, and if you go back to solid view, you can't see any of those spots. Let's also box select that there, and we're just going to delete those vertices because you can't see them. And then also on the back here, if you go into wireframe, you can hit the C for the circle select, and then you can click along here, and you can just select any parts on the back here, which the camera probably won't be able to see. So just select all those vertices. And then after you use the circle select, you can just hit the escape key to bring that out of the circle select. Let's go back to the camera view. And in solid view, you can't see any of those vertices, so we'll delete those vertices. And you can just continue to do that as much as you want, just so the scene is a little bit less dense and isn't quite as laggy. So I'm just going to select a few more of those and a few of the points back here. Go into the camera view. You can't see any of those. You can actually see a little bit right there. So let me hit B for the box select, and I can click and drag with my middle mouse wheel, and that'll deselect that area. Let's go back here, kind of deselect that there. All right, hit X and delete the vertices. All right, so that's pretty good. So it's a bit lower poly now, and we added the subsurf, which is going to give it more detail. But I also want to add some modifiers to give it a bit more surface detail. So let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the displace modifier, and let's click on new here to add a new texture, and I can click on the texture to rename it, and I'll rename it to mountain noise, and I can rename the displace modifier to mountain noise as well. And then let's click on this little button here to go to the texturing panel, and on image removey we're going to choose clouds instead, and then here on the size I'm going to turn this to a 1.5, and even though the size now is just a 1.5, you can see the noise is still quite too big. big. That's because I need to press Ctrl A and apply the scale because we scaled the object way up. So now the noise looks a lot better. And then if I click back here to go to the modifiers, here on the strength value, I will turn this to like a 0.5, so it's just half as strong. So there it is before and there it is after, so it adds quite a bit of detail. And then I want to add one more displacement, so I'll click on add modifier. We'll add another displace modifier. Let's click on new to add a new texture. And I want to click on this button here to duplicate the texture so it is separate. And I'm going to rename it to Mountain Voronoi. And then let's click on this button here to go to the texturing panel again. And this time, instead of the type here being clouds, I'm going to use the Voronoi instead. And then let's change a few of the settings here. So on this distance metric, I want to change this to the distance squared instead. And then on the coloring here, I'm going to change this to position and outline. So this will give us the Voronoi with those little cracks. And then I'm going to change the size here to like a 3. So now if I zoom in here, you can see there's all these little cracks. So let's go back here to the modifier properties, and I'm going to turn the strength way down, maybe to just like a 0.3. That's a bit too subtle. So maybe like a 0.5, something like that. So now you can see right there, there's those little Voronoi cracks. So here it is without it, and then here it is with it. So it gives even more surface detail. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode to see how that's looking, and the mountains look much more detailed, but of course we need to add a material. So we'll select the object. Let's go here to the shading workspace, and I'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just call these mountains. So for the mountain material, I'm gonna first go to the add menu and I'm gonna search for a noise texture. We're gonna add a base noise texture to make it look more detailed. With the noise texture selected, let's press Ctrl T to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And I want to use the object coordinates so the object can go into the vector so it places the texture on the object more evenly. Let's Ctrl Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And I want to change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 2 and I'll turn the detail up to like a 10. You could turn it up to 15 though if you want to. And the roughness I'll turn up to like 8.6. Now I want to add the colors to the noise, so I'll go to the add menu and I can search for the mix color node, and we'll put the mix color node here after the noise texture. And then the factor can go into the factor. So now the white and dark values of the noise texture will determine what parts will be color A and color B. So for color A, let's make this kind of like a light brownish, kind of an orangey color. And for color B, this is going to be kind of just like a light brown. And the hex values that I'll be using for color A is going to be a hex value of FF865A. And for color B, the hex value is going to be AE6F57. And then just like we did for the rock texture, I want to add a wave texture to kind of give it some stripes to look like layers of rock. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll search for the wave texture. We'll drop this under the noise. And again, the mapping vector can go into the vector of the wave. And let's Control Shift and select the wave texture to preview it. Now it's really hard to see the wave, so on the scale here, let's turn that to like a 0.2, and that way you can actually see the waves better. And then let's change some of the settings. So I'll turn the distortion to like a 7, so it looks a bit more random. And I'll turn the detail to 10, and then also the detail scale. Let's turn this to like a 1.5, so there's a little bit more of that scale of the detail. And then I want to make this wave texture a little bit darker, so let's go to the add menu and add the hue saturation value, and we'll put this after the wave texture, and I'm going to turn the value way down to like a 0.4 so it's a bit darker. And I think I will turn the scale up a little bit to like maybe a 0.3, just so there's a bit more of those lines. Now I also want to add a bit of ambient occlusion, so right up here, let's go to the add menu. We're going to search for ambient occlusion. We'll put this above the noise texture. Let's Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion to preview it. And this color here, I'm going to make this kind of like a gray color so that you can see it a bit better. And then what I'm going to do is turn this distance up to like 1,000 so you can really see that quite a bit better, because this object is so large we need to turn that distance up. So now you can see in some areas here and there and kind of those cracks and crevices, it's a bit darker. Now to make it more contrasty, let's search for a color ramp. We'll put the color ramp after the ambient occlusion. And then if I drag these values together, that's going to make it more contrasty. And I actually want to flip the values, so the white tab is over here and the black tab is over here. And I'm going to drag the black tab pretty close and then bring the white tab to about there. So let's just zoom in to the object so you can kind of see what that looks like. So now what I want to do is bring these nodes back here, and I want to mix in the ambient occlusion and the base color. So to do this, we'll duplicate the mix and we'll drop it here. And on the mix type, we want to change this to darken. So now this color here can go into the factor, and then this mix here, which is the original color, that can go into color A. So let's Control Shift and select the darken to preview it. So now color B, this can be fully black, and so that's basically going to be the ambient occlusion. So here on the color ramp, if we drag this around, that's going to make it more contrasty to control the ambient occlusion. So kind of in some of these darker areas, kind of the crevices, it looks a little bit darker, and that looks pretty cool. So let's drag these back so it has a bit more space, and I also want to mix in the wave. So we'll duplicate the darken, we'll drop it right here. We're going to leave the type set to darken, and we're going to take the hue saturation value, which is the wave texture, and we'll put that into the factor, and make sure you Control Shift and select the darken to preview it. And then for color B here, you can make this whatever color you want for those waves. So I'm going to make color B kind of like a mid dark brown color. And the color that I'm going to use here on color B is a hex value of 593619. So now we have a really cool texture there for the mountains. So we can put the darken result into the base color of the principled shader, and let's Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. We'll just wait for that to load up, and you can see it's quite shiny, so I want to make it much more rough. So I'll turn the roughness to like a 0.8, so it is quite a bit more rough. Now I also want to add some surface bump, so let's go to the add menu, and we're going to add a bump node so we can convert the texture data into bump data. So let's drop this down here, and we're first going to take this hue saturation value, and we'll put that into the height value of the bump. And then the bump can go into the normal, and this way it's going to add some bump there where the waves are. And then it's a bit too strong, so I want to turn the strength way down to just like 8.3, so that's a bit better. You can kind of control that strength, but I think a 0.3 is pretty good. And then also let's duplicate the bump node with Shift D. We'll drop it here after the first one, and we're going to take this noise texture and we'll put that into the height value to just add a bit more surface bump over the material. And for this one, I'm going to turn the strength value to like a 0.2, so it's kind of subtle. So now it looks like some really rough rock, kind of some desert rock. So if we go into the camera view, that looks really cool. And you can also select the sunlight and double tap the R key to rotate the sunlight around to do the trackball rotation. You can really kind of get the lighting to what you want. So if you want more like a day scene, you could turn this way up. Although if you turn it way down and it's pointed straight down, it's a bit bright, so you might want to turn the brightness down. Or you could make it kind of like an evening scene or a morning scene and kind of have the lighting very long, kind of have those long shadows because the sun is kind of on the horizon. So something like that. You can also rotate it forward or rotate it back if you want more shadows on the mountains. All right, I'll go back here to the layout. Let me zoom out here. I'll press Control S to save this again, and this will be it for part 4 of the tutorial series. So there's only one more part left. So in the last part, in part 5, we're going to be using geometry nodes to distribute all of the low poly desert objects on the ground, and then we'll also like add some haze and do the rendering and the compositing and just finish up the scene. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this so far, and when the next part is released, it's going to be right up there on the end screen, and I'll have the link in the description. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the final part.